Do not be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. How funny. Last week's lesson from Luke started with a man in the crowd of thousands gathered around Jesus by suddenly standing up and calling out to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." This week's text answers that man's fear that he won't get as much as he deserves from the inheritance his parents left them, nor as much as he thinks he needs. Having told the crowd about the folly of measuring one's life by possessions, Jesus offers the crowd an antidote to the fear that often drives our greed. Do not be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's pleasure to give you the kingdom. Actually, scholars of Greek, which I am not, say that in that verse, the verb is something like what we would call past perfect tense in English. The action has been completed in the past already. So it's really something like, the Father has already been pleased to give you the kingdom. It's as if the family will has been signed and sealed, and our names are already listed as beneficiaries to the whole shebang. The deed to God's kingdom has our names on it, and we can live there whenever we want. But we're often too afraid to try it. We've learned to rely on life as we think we have to manage it, not on the life God invites us to claim. Unfortunately, fear steals our joy much more regularly, I think, than it guarantees our security. Annie Dillard, whom you probably know, is a prize-winning author from Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, tells a personal story about childhood fear in her book of essays called Teaching a Stone to Talk. In this little piece, it's Christmas Eve. Annie's 5 years old, and she has a baby sister. And after Christmas Eve dinner with her family in a restaurant, they all come home and they set out cookies and milk for Santa. They tidy up the Christmas decorations, and Annie's standing over the heat register to warm her cold legs. And suddenly, there's a commotion at the front door. And everyone begins calling to her, "Hey, Annie, come look who's here. Look who's here." And the cold wind is suddenly wrapping around her. Annie looks. It's Santa Claus. She had never, ever wanted to meet Santa Claus. But there he was, looming in the doorway, looking around for Annie as the night blew in, and she bolted up the stairs. Annie remembers it this way. Like everyone in his right mind, I feared Santa Claus because I thought he was God. I was still young. I was thoughtless and brute and reactive. I knew right from wrong, but I had barely tested the possibility of shaping my own behavior, and then only from fear, not yet from love. Santa Claus, she thought, was an old man whom you never saw, but who nevertheless saw you and knew when you'd been bad or good. And he knew that she had been bad because she had. So, ignoring her parents' pleading that she come to the door and meet Santa Claus, and ignoring her baby sister's crying, Annie went on all the way up the stairs, and she never came down. Though Santa stood there in the doorway, as she describes it, monstrous and bright, ringing a loud bell and repeating, "Merry Christmas! Merry Christmas!" It turned out that Santa was really Miss White, the older lady who lived across the street all by herself. And somehow Annie's impressions blended Miss White and Santa and God in sort of a little child's version of the Trinity. And Miss White really liked having Annie around. She did art with her, she fed her cookies, she taught her things about the world. But the summer following that scary Christmas, Miss White was showing her a magnifying glass in her yard. And pretty quickly, The light concentrated on one little spot on Annie's hand, and then it began to burn, and so she ran home crying. Miss White called after her, I'm so sorry, and she tried to explain what had happened, but Annie ran away again. Adult Annie now wonders, if I meet God, will he take hold of my bare hand in his and focus his eye on my palm and kindle that spot and let me burn? But no, it is I who misunderstood everything and let everybody down. Miss White, God, I am sorry I ran from you. I am still running from the knowledge that love from which there is no refuge. For you meant only love, and I felt only fear and pain. So once in Israel, love came to us incarnate, stood in the doorway between two worlds, and we were all afraid. So many of our fears are born of our misconceptions of who God is, maybe a perception that we happened upon in childhood, knowing that we were not always good. And so as we grew and became more competent at managing our exposure to pain, we learned things like, don't ride your bicycle off the edge of the porch, or don't grab a hold of the tailpipe if you walk around the back of the car when your dad has just driven home. But probably a little more subtly, maybe more frequently and more deeply, people learn, don't let anyone know you have messed up because you did something you shouldn't have. Stay below the radar. Only show and tell what makes you look good so you can avoid conflict and maybe even shame. The lesson we learn many times is to control our behavior out of fear, not love. I learned that one. Maybe you did too. Somewhere along the line, we all learn to fear some things because life gives us solid evidence that pain happens. We fall off a bike. We burn ourselves on the tip of the iron. The ring we just got as a child for Christmas falls into the bathtub and goes down the drain. A classmate dies in a car wreck. We overdraw our checking account. We're the guilty party in a car accident. We bump into the walls of our marriage. It may take us decades to realize what we fear and why. There are probably many layers to it. And somewhere along the line, something unexpected and deeply painful will surprise most of us. We don't like it. And we try to avoid that pain with every tactic we can muster, at great cost sometimes to our souls. You see, God intends only love and love. But like Annie Dillard as a child, we often reckon that love for fear and pain. And so we run away from God too. Or at least think we'd better hide and not show God who we really are. When we bump into one another on those little deaths that come to all of us, losing somebody we love, having to move for work and so losing our community back home, a spouse who betrays us, friends who drop us, and we think we want what we had before. We most likely pray for what we had to be restored. It's okay to start our praying there. But we are probably more faithful if eventually we invite God in for a resurrection, a transformation to turn our little deaths into something better that we can't even yet imagine. Just as we hope one day when we die to this earthly life to be resurrected and transformed. What if, for example, the losses and griefs we suffer are exactly the ones that will allow us to be made into new people? Perhaps our sadness will lead her to greater honesty. Maybe losing a job will allow our long-term craving for work that satisfies our hearts as well as pays our bills to surface again and send us off in a new direction. Maybe an illness will help us appreciate every day of life, easy or hard. God is always making us new, and that scares us because we're not in control of it. And we don't know what life will be like when it's all settled out. Just like we didn't know how puberty was going to work out or how midlife changes are going to work out. Brian C. Taylor puts it this way: we think we know what we want to become. When things get hard and we suffer, we think we know what healing would look like. We imagine restoration, back to the old stuff, and comfort. But God may know that we need to get a bit worse first, so that we are willing for God to step in at a deeper level, healing something that we didn't even know needed healing. If we have a religious crisis, maybe we don't need to keep on praying the same way we've always prayed about the same things. Maybe we need to shed our old kind of faith so we can gain a new kind of faith, one that sustains who we really are: needy, gifted, capable, inadequate, selfish and generous, blind to some things and insightful about others. God can work with who we really are. And God will work with who we really are to bring more freedom and humility and joy into the world. Radical openness is what we need to move toward. Like the openness of the good servants in today's gospel, who are not preparing frantically, but do not resist doing what they are there to do, preparing for whatever the master may want, even though they don't know when he's going to show up. And so we need to be radically open to what God might be preparing for us to become. And we can trust that every transformation God desires is going to bring us more freedom and joy and love in our world. To put it in the metaphor of today's gospel lesson, we need not stay anxiously on guard, but loyal to our relationship, available for what is ours to do, responsive, ready, even if that means being surprised at some point by the master's return. The surprise will be that he serves us, blessing us in ways we could not have anticipated nor asked for. We don't need to fear that. Spiritual growth, I think, so often involves being willing to lean back against the Spirit, as Tilden Edwards calls it, letting go of our desire to polish ourselves up, especially before God, and opening ourselves up to God's mysterious care and creativity. As I think about this, one of the images that comes to mind for me is the Y in Townsend. It's where the little river, which begins on the north slope of Cleman's Dome and flows eastward, gets some force from several creeks, and then it joins near Townsend in a confluence with the middle prong of the little river. Each prong brings its own momentum, its own direction, but as they meet and flow into and through each other, they bring more water, more possibility for aquatic life, more food, more recreation for us humans than either could deliver alone. So I think God meets us on our route when we're willing to be open and hands-off. With whatever we're carrying, God meets us and flows in and through our lives to put it out into the world. We desire a better country, as Abraham and Sarah did, and all our forebears who died in faith. We desire a better life, one that seems a little more, heavenly, the kind where a loving God reigns, releasing love and generosity and honesty and forgiveness and grace into us all the time as we are willing. We pray for this every time we worship together. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. We are praying for God's wisdom, love, and power to flow through us and into the world. It will change us, but fear not, little flock. God has already been pleased to give us the kingdom. So look for glimpses of heaven now. Be ready to move into that space. Instead of being afraid, just let it be.